Hello, everybody. This is Margaret Thorpe with Blueworks Live Product Management, and I'm here today to talk to you about the new release of Blueworks Live that we have coming up this weekend, actually. So it's all about managing and governing change, this release. So managing the life cycle of business assets in the Blueworks Live repository, enabling you to monitor the status of artifacts as they move through their life cycle, basically, and governing changes at the artifact version level, so enabling you to edit, review, approve, and publish versions of blueprints and decisions, and clearly identify the version of record of a given artifact. So there are a couple of concepts that I'd like to introduce. So in this release, we've introduced the notion of a governance workflow. And basically, a governance workflow is a workflow that's been associated with an artifact, basically. For those of you that have used process apps in Blueworks Live, it's really associating a process app with a specific artifact. And governance workflows are used to manage and track the review and approval of business artifacts by SMEs and stakeholders. So here on this slide, you see an example of a simple governance workflow where we're launching the workflow, and it initially splits off into parallel review streams, and we send it to finance for a review, and at the same time, operations takes a look at it as well. And once those two reviews are complete, it's ready to go to legal for final approval. And if legal approves it, then we actually want to publish the new version of this blueprint. So that's an example of what we mean by governance workflow. The other new concept in this release is the notion of publishing. And for those of you that have used the sharing capability in Blueworks Live, this is very similar, but there are some differences, which we'll talk about later. Publishing is essentially enabling you to make sure that everybody's looking at the right version of a business process or decision, the version that you want them to be looking at. So when you publish in Blueworks Live, that becomes very obvious. It can be easily identified as the published version, and whenever anybody navigates to the artifact, they're taken directly to that published version. So in terms of giving you more control and visibility over the process lifecycle, the Blueworks Live administrators and space managers, you'll have control over which users can launch and participate in governance workflows. We'll talk about a couple of settings that are relevant here. The process owners, you can request review and approval of artifacts, track the status of stakeholder responses, and publish a final approved version for everybody to see. Collaborators will be able to see when a governance workflow is in progress for a given artifact, and stakeholders, or participants in the workflow, you'll receive notification when your review or approval is required. And project managers and auditors, they'll be able to view all of the governance workflows that have been run for an artifact over its life. So let's take a look at each of these things in a little more depth. So to enable governance workflows, there are a couple of settings that are of interest here. So on the admin console in Blueworks Live, the customization tab, you would need to enable the work feature. So by checking the display the work page box that I've highlighted here on this slide. And then the users that will need to have permission to launch and participate in workflows, all they'll need to have are space-level permissions to automate processes, as you see down here on the bottom. So that box needs to be checked at the space level. And that's all you need. So governance workflows are based on Blueworks Live process apps, as I said. And so the first thing you do in creating a governance workflow is create a process app. And for those of you that haven't seen a process app or worked with them in the past, it's a customizable workflow template that you can configure with parameters. You can label pieces of information that you want users to enter when they launch this particular workflow template. And over here on the right, you can see you define the tasks, the structure of the workflow. So in this example, we have an initial sequential task called preliminary review. And then immediately following that, we have a set of 3 parallel tasks that are actually going to be executed in parallel. And once those 3 tasks are done, we have a final sequential task called final approval in this example. And, that's what the workflow editor basically looks like. So once you've created a governance workflow, it can be launched directly from the process or decision diagram in Blueworks Live. And so here we are in the process diagram, and what used to be the revision history icon up there is now called snapshots. When you open the snapshot menu, you'll be able to see all of the versions of this particular process. And in this case, you can see that I'm actually looking at a version draft 1.0, and the yellow banner at the top of the screen tells me that I'm viewing a read-only snapshot of this process. And the actions over here to the right that I can perform, launch a process app is one of those. So if I select that, it will associate the process app with this process, with this blueprint, basically, and launch a governance workflow. So if I'm a participant in the workflow that we just launched, the reviewers and approvers would be notified of pending tasks, and they can navigate directly to the process or decision diagram to complete their tasks in context. So if I had been notified by email, or I'd gone to my work, to the work tab to see what tasks were pending for me, I would have seen that there was a task, and I could have clicked on that and come to the screen, which is the process diagram, but you'll see a couple of interesting things here. One, there's this work in progress icon, which basically tells me that there's one or more governance workflows in progress for this artifact. And then you can see that I've got an approve and reject button up there, which basically is telling me that there's a task for me related to this artifact. And so I can review the blueprint, I can look through the details of it, and if I'm comfortable, I can approve it or reject it. And so that's what it looks like, to participate in a governance workflow in this new release. So let's say you'd made a bunch of changes to your blueprint, and you'd sent it out for formal review, and all the approvals would come in. And now you'd like to take that version, the final approved version, and you'd like to publish it so everybody will see this version, and that's the version that they will, work with effectively. So that's when you would use the new publish tool, and that's also accessible from the process diagram. And as you see, it's down on the snapshot menu because you publish at the version level. And so here we see we selected version 1.0, which is the same diagram that actually we're viewing, and we publish it right there. And once you publish a version, you get this gold badge that shows up anywhere where that version is visible, so whether it's in the library or the space overview. So you'll always be able to tell if you're looking at the published version because you'll see that badge. And finally, if you have the need to see all of the governance workflows that have executed throughout the life of an artifact, you can do this from the process diagram as well. So you come here, and actually we've reorganized a little bit some of the tools on the palette here, and we've expanded this drop-down menu to include a number of them, and view work history is up there at the top. And if you click on that, you'll see a list displayed for you of all the different instances and workflows that have been run for this artifact over its life. And if you click on any one of these, it'll take you to the details so you can see, who exactly approved what when and all that good stuff. So that's the new functionality in a nutshell. And I'd just like to summarize some of the key product changes. that you'll see next week when you take a look at the new version of the product. So as I mentioned, process apps can now be associated with blueprints or decisions, so effectively creating what we're calling governance workflows. And the workflow editor has been enhanced. You saw that you can define parallel and sequential tasks. The revision history tool has been renamed, as we saw. It's called the snapshot. It's called snapshots now. And the snapshot menu is where you launch governance workflows and publish specific versions of an artifact from. All of the rest of the functionality that was part of the revision history tool in the snapshot menu is just the same. So, creating a snapshot is the same. That produces a read-only version of the artifact. And subsequent changes are then made to the current version of the artifact, which is the same behavior that you'll see in the new release. It hasn't changed. But publish replaces share, so you'll no longer see share in the product. And publish works very similarly, but there are a couple of differences that I'd like to point out. So it's similar in that when you publish an artifact version, it makes it visible to every Blueworks Live user that's a participant of the space that that artifact resides in, regardless of which specific permissions they've been granted. But there are a couple of key differences. Publish works at the version level, so you're not publishing the artifact per se, you're publishing a particular version of the artifact, and only one version of an artifact can be published at any given point in time. So what this allows you to do is really, you can create a version and name a version of your artifact, and that will create basically a read-only snapshot. And if you publish that, it will cause everybody to see that version, and they'll see it in read-only mode, so it's not something that they'll be able to modify. If you wanted to keep the same behavior that you have today in the product with share, you would just need to publish the current version. And in this case, everybody will be able to see subsequent changes to the artifact. There'll be no limitation there. So you can go ahead and work the way you have in the past if you don't want to avail yourself of any of this new functionality, and just publish the current version. So now I'd like to just give a really quick demo of some of what we just touched on. Let's see here. So let's say I've been working on this process blueprint with my team, and I'm ready to send it out for review and approval. And so I'd like to launch a governance workflow. So I have a couple of process apps in my space that actually would work fine for this purpose, I happen to know. But for those of you that haven't seen process apps, let me go ahead and just create a new one so you'll get a flavor for how that works. So let's call it something simple like formal review, and and that brings us into the configure process app page here, where I can add a bunch of details and labels for the person launching this workflow to fill out when they launch it. So, this template should be used for blah, 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 blah. I'm going to actually use a convention here where I want let's see, process version name is something that I think our team should always be entering when we launch these governance workflows, so I'm going to ask for that in the template and allow them to specify like a specific area of focus for the review if there is one. So those will be some pieces of information in the template. And now I'm going to define the tasks here. So let's start out with a legal approval. And we're going to assign that task to Megan. And the define it as an approval step. Then we're going to follow that with another sequential task, and this is going to be finance review. And let's assign that as well. And then I want to create a parallel task that kicks off along with the finance review at the same time. And let me assign that as well. And that's a very simple workflow, but for this demo, it's just fine. So I'll make that available for launching. And let's go back and let's say now I'm ready to launch my governance workflow. I go back, I'm here on the process diagram, and I'll open up the snapshot menu here, and I can see that there are multiple versions, and actually I created version 2.0, and that's the version that I'd like to send out for review. So I select the actions menu over here on the right and say launch a process app, and it allows me to choose which one I want to associate it with, and I can launch it. And so once I launch it, it asks me for some information. Let me go ahead and fill that in. So let's take a look at military discounts for underwriting to make sure we got that right, because we made a lot of changes to that part of the process. And that's about all I need to fill in. I could also add due dates for these tasks here. I could change the tasks as well. It's very flexible, so I don't have to stick with the predefined template if it needs to be modified slightly. So let's go ahead and launch this. So as you'll see, once the workflow's been launched, we go back to the process diagram, and here's this little work in progress icon that's telling us, in fact, that there's a couple of outstanding workflows that are in progress for this particular artifact. So let's then take a look at what it looks like from the participant's perspective. So let me flip over here to another browser, and if you'll recall, in the workflow that I just created, the first task was a legal approval task that had been assigned to Megan. So Megan, coming into Blueworks Live in the morning, she comes over to the Work tab, and she looks for any new tasks that have been assigned to her. And lo and behold, there's the legal approval task. So she clicks on that. It brings up the workflow instance, and she can click on the artifact link, and it'll bring her into the process diagram. And as you can see, her tasks, approve, reject, these buttons represent her task, are on the process diagram for her, so she can, poke around and review whatever she needs to in this process, and when she's ready, she can approve or reject. So let's go ahead and approve this. Yes, I'm sure I want to approve it. And so that's what it looks like if you're a participant. And once she approves it, she gets details of, time and date that was approved, and that also is visible from the workflow instance. So let's go back to the original user that launched the workflow. So I'm back on the other browser now. And let's say, for example, that all of the tasks had been complete and everything had been approved for this particular process blueprint, and I'm ready to go ahead and publish it. So I'd open up the snapshot menu here, and we're looking at version 2.0, and that's the version that I want to publish. So I can just select the publish action here on the right-hand side and publish. And as you see, the published little golden badge pops up and indicates that this is actually the published version of the process. So when anybody looks at, hold on, let's go back. Oops, that's not where I wanted to go back to. So when anybody looks at this process, they'll see this little gold badge, and when they navigate to it, they'll actually be brought in to that version of the process rather than the current version. So that's the new functionality. And I guess there's maybe one other thing I'd show you here. We can view work history from the drop-down menu here up at the top, and we can take a look at any governance workflow instances that have been executed for this artifact, and I can go navigate to one of those instances, and it will bring me into the actual detailed workflow instance, and I can see exactly what happened. So that, in a nutshell, is a summary of the new functionality in the release. And now I'm going to take everybody off of broadcast mode and open it up for questions.